want to know which planet was causing your suffering? How about Earth?
Hey everyone, Brandflakes here, back with a new Shadowverse 2 video. For today's video, I'm going to try and go through everything I know about roach lethals for calculating, so if you want to have a spreadsheet out or just review to this later, I'll post a link to this particular slideshow and deck in the comments or in the description. And yeah, hopefully it makes sense. I made this in under an hour and I have not made a slideshow since I quit work like a year ago, so this is my first time going back to this. But yeah, so welcome to my school presentation, guys. Basically, this slideshow or this entire guide will assume that you have Carbuncle and CAIRN on board, unless otherwise noted. The very bare minimum basics you need to know is that at 10 mana, you need 2 0 costs for Double Roach. Every single other point of mana assumes that you're using a 1 cost. For Triple Roach, you only need 1 cost at 10 mana, and then at 9 mana, you need 3 0 costs for Double Roach and 2 0 costs for Triple Roach, and then at 8th mana, that's when the damage equalizes, so you need 4 0 costs for both Double and Triple Roach. So this will make more sense as we get along the video, but this is going to be the classic Double Roach board. We're always going to be super evoing Carbuncle. If you guys wanted a guide on how to just do basic Roach math, good luck. I'm hoping that you guys can see those lines while you're playing the game because you don't have a Carbuncle in hand, and you'll be able to calculate that a bit more easily, just because obviously no Carbuncle means that you don't have any random addition going on with the Roach lethals. So this will be all assuming Carbuncle Roach, Super Evolve. So yeah, your board, when you're doing classic Double Roach, is going to be a CAIRN plus a Godwood, and your hand will always have at least 1 0 cost from playing the CAIRN earlier with a Carbuncle and a Roach. And so the reason why this is very classic is because, as you can see with the card order, you'll always start with the Deepwood Bounty, and then you'll bounce the CAIRN with the Carbuncle, and then you replay the CAIRN, which will then let you play the Deepwood Bounty. And so this combo requires you to have at least 8 mana, which is something I probably should have put on here. But you need 8 mana at least, because what ends up happening, or rather you need 8 mana, because this will drop you down to 4 mana. Oh no, my bad. You need at least 7 mana for this combo, because you'll play the Carbuncle and then you play CAIRN, and then you'll Super Evo Carbuncle, so 7 mana, you spend 4 mana, so you're at 3. And Super Evoing Carbuncle will give you back to 6, which means that your bare minimum damage with this setup is going to be 11 damage with Double Roach. Now, obviously, this is nowhere near enough to kill somebody. You're only dealing 13 damage with this combo, and so that's where we extend the combo with more. And so you can see here, these aren't really a strict guide. Basically, you just have to use your better judgment. Obviously, I mentioned earlier the 0 mana cost minimums you'll have for these OTKs, and so the only time where you really see like a Deepwood Bounty only is when you bounce it with where you bounce the CAIRN with a Carbuncle, so that's why this is only a Deepwood. And so basically, the bare minimum you need to consistently OTK is going to be at least, like, what is this, 5 other cards outside of the Baby Carbuncle and CAIRN, because with Baby Carbuncle, CAIRN, and the first Deepwood, actually you only need 4 cards outside of this, because the beauty of CAIRN, as we'll go over with this next slide, or one of these slides, wow, I really have not made a presentation in so long. So the reason why CAIRN is such a strong card for Carbuncle Roach is because CAIRN by itself provides you 3 combo, with CAIRN itself being cast, Deepwood being cast, and then the extra fairy that you gain from it. So I probably should have just put a fairy here, just so you guys knew that it was possible. So outside of that, you need 4 other cards to be played, and so very often you'll either be playing another 1 cost or another Deepwood or 0 cost that you farmed during the game. And so once you've played 4 0 costs or 4 cards outside of the Carbuncle CAIRN combo, that brings you up to 9 and 10 damage with your Carbuncle Roach. And then if you have a CAIRN, you don't need the Super Evo ping, obviously, from your Carbuncle, or maybe you just burn the CAIRN on something else and you use the Super Evo ping to kill something. That gives you a clean 20 damage, and this is the most common line you'll be finding with Double Roach. It's going to be getting as many 0 costs as possible, making sure that you have a bunch of 1 cost or playable 1 cost in your hand, and then going for a OTK dependent on how much mana you have aligned with how many 0 costs you have. And I'll go over that table there. The other 1 cost you'll have are going to be these 5 1 costs for the most part. Some decks cut certain 1 costs. Obviously you have fairies, but that's not in your deck itself. Some decks cut Good Fairy of the Pawn, some decks cut Ambush from Above, but almost every single Roach deck right now plays Convocation, Eradicating Arrow, and Bug Alert. And this is really important to note because Bug Alert represents technically another fairy cast. So if we go back to here, you get a guaranteed fairy from CAIRN, right? So maybe you only have one other 1-cost in hand. What ends up happening is that if you have 2 0-cost still, the extra fairy cast can be duplicated by bug alert. So pretend this is a bug alert cast instead over here. That means you get 1 extra fairy for your troubles. So that's why bug alert is really good for Roach in general, and then convocation is obviously very good because convocation represents 3 1-costs by itself. And then Riding Arrow, Ambush from Above, and Good Fairy. Good Fairy is really bad just because you can't get the fairy out of her immediately unless there's an enemy, I think Cruel is her name on the board. And so she's going to be, that's the reason why she's cut most of the time. But otherwise, yeah. Convocation, Bug Alert are your top picks for 1-cost for the combo turn. And then Riding Arrow is just really good for dealing with certain very wide boards. And then the reason why CAIRN on the board is so good, as I mentioned earlier, is because with Deepwood Bounty and Carbuncle, you bounce the CAIRN back to your hand, and then you get 3 extra combo basically for free with the CAIRN. So CAIRN represents 3 of your mana very easily. So usually the problem, if you don't have CAIRN on the board, is that it's really hard to figure out how to keep enough 1-costs to play into CAIRN. But because of the way CAIRN works, you can really treat CAIRN as a +1 hand size because it's on your board, because you can see that Deepwood plus Carbuncle is only 2 cards, and then your 3rd card and CAIRN is on the board, so you're adding again +1 to your hand size, which is why it's really good because you get the Deepwood and the fairy back. So this this technically 3 card combo between Deepwood, Carbuncle, and CAIRN becomes a 5 card combo because of the duplicated Deepwood and fairy. And odds are this Deepwood came from CAIRN itself, so it's really a 2 card combo for the most part that gives you 5 combo total in the late game. So that's why CAIRN on board. That's why we really try and play around CAIRN for these OTK turns, because it's both a very good target for Bug Alert early on, and then yeah, everything else that's going on with the full OTK set. And so this is the table I made for Double Roach with Carbuncle Super Evo. You'll notice that I cut out the CAIRNs because you don't actually need that extra damage from either CAIRN or Carbuncle Super Evo to get the full 20 when you have the 5 extra cards played. So at 10 mana, you'll need 2 0-costs. At 9 mana, you need 3 0-costs. At 8 mana, you'll need 4 0-costs, which will be only possible with like double bayle and 2 Deepwood Bounties in hand. And then 7 mana, if you somehow get 5 0-cost, you can technically pull this off as well, because again, remember that the Carbuncle plus CAIRN combo is possible at 4 mana or at 7 mana because you drop down 4 mana into 3. And then I still put the rest of the totals down here just in case you want to see how many you're playing, because sometimes you'll go for early tempo and then that early tempo will sometimes stick. So against decks like Sword, sometimes Abyss, even sometimes Rune, if they're kind of unlucky, you'll be able to reach for certain different types of thresholds. So just remember that every time you drop down 1 total card played, that is -2 damage to your overall damage. And remember that this is actually supposed to be 18 and not just, or it's supposed to be 19 instead of 18. So remember that if your opponent is at 19 HP, like they have 1 damage they didn't bother healing off, you can actually go for a 9 total card number kill, which is 1 0-cost at 10 mana, 2 0-cost at 9 mana, 3 0-cost at 8 mana. So you should always be aware of that potential lethal opening up and not discount that. So I know that this is a guide for OTKing, but technically 19 mana is an OTK, which is why I didn't make sure that that was obvious. But just remember, if they're at 19 HP or if they're below 20 HP, you might be able to kill them slightly earlier with different solutions that you have. And then when you have 2 CAIRNs on board, it actually becomes a bit more interesting. I didn't delete this 10 for some reason, but basically the reason why 2 CAIRNs on board is interesting is because you actually are able to drop 1 more 0-cost card or 1 more card cast overall. You can see that here, if you have 2 CAIRNs, either 1 CAIRN on board or another CAIRN in your hand, what happens is that you can bounce the CAIRN. If you have 2 CAIRNs on board, you can bounce the CAIRN on board. But sometimes you don't want to actually bounce the CAIRN on board because it costs a lot of mana to use. So like, just as an example, like if you want to play 2 CAIRNs and a Carbuncle in 1 turn, that's 6 mana overall. That means you can play 1 other 1-cost mana card in order to get everything. But sometimes if you want to do, that's only possible if you're at 9 mana, I believe. So sometimes you may be able to cheese out a like 8 mana kill if you look for a 1 mana card instead. Or there are certain scenarios where you need to cast other cards to clear the board, so you can't actually afford to use the second CAIRN, right? I know this is all like very vague and there's no examples on screen to really show you guys what you mean, but if you're playing more games of Carbuncle Roach, you probably understand what I mean later on. So the reason why the distinction is important between double CAIRN on board versus 1 CAIRN on hand is because sometimes you'll bounce a fairy and then played the second Cairn from hand instead of bouncing the second Cairn or the first Cairn on board and then playing both. So just keep that in mind, because the entire reasoning for this is that you play at least one Cairn, and then you don't want to actually bounce the first Cairn on board if you don't have to, because it's really expensive and not really useful for your overall board clear to do that. And so yeah, on the table, we can see with 2 Cairn, this means that your lethal drops by 1 card played again, as I mentioned earlier, because you'll be having the double roach at 8 and 9 damage, which means you're doing 17, but the other 3 damage you need to kill somebody is from the super evo ping and then the 2 Cairns on board. So if you have double Cairn on board, like if you draw too many Cairns and you're like, oh, what the heck, I don't know how to play all these, remember that you can look for an earlier lethal or even just a lethal with a 2 mana cost card, because while this isn't in this video because it's really complicated, the less 1 cost you have to play, or I guess the less 0 cost you have to play, that means you can actually kind of sub in 1 more 0 cost and then sub out a 1 mana card for a 2 mana card. So I probably should put this as a slide, but just pretend that in this scenario you need to play Lily and you want to do this 9 combo total. If you put 2 0 mana costs here, then that means you can sub out one of your 1 mana costs for a Lily. So you can play like double Lily or double Deepwood into a Lily and then play something like Ambush Eradicating Arrow, and that will still give you the full 17 plus 3, because instead of playing 2 fairies, for example, or instead of playing 3 fairies, for example, you're playing 1 Lily and 1 Eradicating Arrow, and that might be a better board clear than playing 3 fairies, or like you lacking those 3 fairies, if that makes sense. So again, probably something I should have put here, but hopefully me saying it out loud helps you guys digest what it actually means. But you can see that with Cairns, if you're doing double roach kills, you can actually, again, kill faster or kill with less overall, because you're using less total cards, or you're required to have less total cards to kill, rather. And then once again, below you can see different types of lethal ranges, just in case your opponent's at 18 HP instead of 20 HP, you're able to reach that much more with double Cairn as well. Now, another important thing to know is how to handle desynced double roaches. Now, desynced is just the term for whenever you can't play the roach one after another. This is still actually very simple for double roach, because again, as I pointed out earlier, you overkill by 1 with a standard double roach combo. So if you have 10 cards total played, you actually aren't affected that much. And this is really helpful because there will be certain scenarios where you might be forced to use Beaver Carbuncle or be forced to use Bug Alert as your bounce because your Godwood got bumped or you never drew a second roach. So this is really important because, again, like you just sometimes aren't lucky enough to get the second bounce you need, so you need to look for a different type of bounce. And knowing that 10 card total roach, like double roach plays are literally still in OTK will help you fit in a lot more lethals than you might have expected weren't possible. Now the only issues that you might notice, there's 2 carbuncles here. This carbuncle is just in the scenario where you're able to play like a billion other 1 cost and 0 costs. So just move this second carbuncle all the way over here, because you need to play like Rhino and then bounce it with carbuncle. You probably aren't going to be able to play 2 carbuncles unless you have multiple 0 costs. So again, like I said earlier, the beauty of having multiple Cairns, for example, is that you might be able to move up certain plays because of that. You might be able to move up certain cards because of that second Cairn. So in this example, if you had to play double carbuncle, then having 2 Cairns on board actually lets you play 2 carbuncles, because that one missing 1 mana card you lost from playing 2 carbuncles is made up for by the Cairn on board. So whatever, you guys will know what I mean when you get around to that scenario and start calculating it. And again, the reason to desync roach is because there's a gigantic minion in your way. So for example, Noble Shikigami and Conqueror of Untwining, these are really big minions that didn't exist before. And so what you do is that you play Eradicating Arrow. You can see that here Eradicating Arrow is going to deal 9 total damage, and this is essentially maxing out Eradicating Arrow value, because there will be a lot of scenarios where you only have 1 Eradicating Arrow left in your hand, and this will be the only way you can even chance into a win. So you could maybe do like an Eradicating Arrow here on 7 and then again 9, do 16 overall, or you can just play both one after another. But again, this is the reason to desync roaches, because you need to play the Eradicating Arrow after the first roach so they can swing the roach into their face after swinging with the carbuncle. And then again, if you don't have a traditional roach bounce, you'll need it because you need carbuncle or Bug Alert. And then you'll notice that in the column, there's a bayle here as well. Sometimes bayle won't be quite at 0 mana if you got unlucky with this draw. So when you bounce the roach, or let's say that you're able to bounce the roach, right, with a Godwood Staff, what ends up happening here is that because you bounce the roach, the bayle is now going to be playable. And then so this roach that was 8 mana cost, like originally what would happen is that you played at 8-9 because of the bayle being not discounted, and then that would have made you miss lethal by 1 damage, you can now play the bayle after the first roach because you now have maybe an open slot from Godwood. Maybe you just need the bayle to reach that, and then you'll play the last roach, and there you go. You get the full Super Evo kill. And here's the chart for that. Again, it is the exact same chart as the previous one, but you just notice that it is going to be desynced. So you can see that it's 8 plus 10, so you need both the Carbuncle Super Evo and the CAIRN, and then you just move -2 with every card you lose total played. And then we have Triple Roach. So Triple Roach is a less common line, and it's really important that you know how to calculate Triple Roach because you can steal a lot of games with Triple Roach, and the card draw order that enables Triple Roach will often be very, very unfriendly for Double Roach. And so Triple Roach is usually found when you have too many Godwoods on board or you have too many Rhinos or Rhinoceros in hand. And then this is very different because you actually need less overall cards to be played. Of course, the cards you have are going to be a bit more conditional because it's 2 Godwoods and a Roach, or 1 Godwood and 2 Roaches, or 3 Roaches, period. And then you can see here that with Triple Roach, you have 5 plus 6 plus 7, which is 18, and then +1 with Super Evo Ping and +1 with CAIRN. You can actually do a full 20 damage. So this is only 7 total cards played, which means that you need less 0 cost to OTK with Triple Roach up to a certain point. And an important disclaimer to note that when you're triple roaching, you can only do the Baby Carbuncle and CAIRN combo on 10 mana just because of how the mana totals work. So if you're at 9 mana and you do Baby Carbuncle into CAIRN, from 9 you go down to 5, and then when you Super Evo the Roach, you go back to 8 mana. 8 mana obviously is not enough to do the full combo. So when you're doing triple roach, the reason why it's really, really important. Oh, like, here we go. I did this out of order again. We'll go to this slide first, though. This is sub 10 mana triple roach. You can see it's really important because what will happen is that you will need to have a 1-cost minion in hand often to play triple roach. So that's like having 1 fairy, a May, maybe the good fairy of the pawn if you're playing her. You will need to have a 1-cost if you want a triple roach below 10 mana, and that's super important. You go back here, I talked about this earlier. The game gave you infinite Godwoods or Roaches, so you want a triple roach because that's your only real game plan because you didn't draw CAIRNs or something, or you didn't draw multiple CAIRNs, or you didn't draw a good bounce for the CAIRN. It's technically less cards per card overall, so it's a much cleaner hand space management. Of course, it's not really that clean because you're holding bad cards in your hand, but you do technically need less cards overall. And then it's less likely to be board locked because what happens is that because you have more Godwoods on board, you can use them more. I guess it's like since you have to play less minions, the odds that you get board locked from playing too many minions is a bit lower, but it's still pretty possible. If you set up for a triple roach turn and you have like 2 Godwoods and 2 Roaches on hand, what will happen is that you can actually play stuff like bayle and then bounce the bayle out of your board and then let you play into triple roach because you still have the board space from losing the 2 spots from bouncing bayle. Because when you bounce a bayle, you lose the bayle on board and you lose the Godwood staff on board, and that lets you open up more space to play like fairies or your carbuncle or your roaches. So triple roach is a lot more space efficient technically if you have these set up for it. And then again, on sub 10 mana, you have to have a 1-cost or you have to bounce a bayle. And this is still possible on sub 10 mana because, again, you can actually reach the full OTK. You can reach 7 cards played with Triple Roach below 10 mana. And we see that on the chart here. At 9 total cards, at 10 mana, you need 1 0 cost, or at 9 mana, you need 2 0 cost. And if you remember from the previous slide that we had with the Double Roach OTK, this is actually a faster kill with triple roach than it is with double roach, because again, with double roach we have a 10 mana 2/0 cost, but with triple roach, because it's 5 plus 6 plus 7 and then you get +2 from your Super Evo Carbuncle and CAIRN, you actually reach that threshold a little faster. So you can see that the full comparable 10 mana or 10 card play, I guess the card number is actually wrong, so this is 7 total, so sorry about that. I duplicated these slides. This is very, very wrong, so I should probably keep that in mind when I do the outro. I'll fix it when you guys look at this later on after the video is posted. But yeah, super important stuff. You need to remember this is 7 total cards and 8 total cards. And yeah, again, because of that, you have lethal a bit earlier. Now there's also desynced triple roach, much like desynced double roach. And this requires you to have 8 cards played just because you do need to reach the extra damage from here to here. But this is also important to note just because when you're going for triple roach, sometimes you just don't have enough bounces that exist in your hand or deck. Like I talked about having Godwood staffs or or like multiple goblet staffs and multiple roaches, but sometimes you only have one goblet staff and one roach, and then you'll need to get the third bounce with a carbuncle or a bug alert. And so this is what's really flexible about triple roach again, is that you can actually figure out lethal from positions that double roach would never let you get because you have a third bounce. And so again, 5 plus 7 plus 8 is going to total exactly to 20 damage, and you will almost always need to super evo carbuncle with this unless you have an excess of 0 cost in hand for some reason. And you do not need CAIRN for this because the damage comes out perfectly to 20 with just the 3 roaches that are played. And then desync triple roach, again, we see here, ignore the card total number. We noticed that earlier it was 8 cards total and not 10. But you can see here it's 20 total, and then if you have one less card played, it's going to be 17, which is still very good reach, because remember, with a CAIRN, if you have a CAIRN on board, and if you have Carbuncle Super Evo, this is actually still 19 damage. So remember that as you play the game, that this is missing the Super Evo ping and the CAIRN damage, so you can actually reach further than expected. And so if your opponent isn't healing a 20 every turn, like they're at 17, 18, 19, this desync triple roach, if you have the hand for it, can still reach to the full potential even without the full OTK process. And then this is the final slide, I think. You have to be really careful of bayle. Bayle will board lock you very often because you can't actually sack bayle. It won't matter sometimes, but against a lot of new decks, like for example Cresthaven will very often have 0 attack minions so that you can't sack fairies into it. And because of that, if you're gonna be planning a OTK around bayle, you have to really make sure you have a way to get rid of bayle, or just not have to play him in general in order to get the OTK off. And the other issue is that he can kill your Carbuncle Super Evo target if you're relying on multiple bayles, because again, something like Cresthaven, they will play only a few minions most of the time, and then if you have multiple bayles and like a targeted spell, for example, to deal all of your damage, what ends up happening is that because of the ordering and because of bayle's targeting, like you have to, if you play bayle first, you have to target a spell or a minion. He can kill your 1 damage ping and then throw off your entire calculation because of that. So yeah, again, I'll fix the tables as we get into that, but hopefully this video made sense because I spent a good amount of time making everything. But hopefully if it doesn't make sense, you can just access the tables and then study them yourself, and then you can blab out the lines. And I'll go over like the lines, I guess, in a separate video because this is going to be pretty long. I'm not even checking the timer and I know it's pretty long. So yeah, thanks for watching. Have a good day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.